Good evening, everybody, or good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are from in the world. Welcome to another one of our Lumix Live sessions here on YouTube. This week's session is going to be kind of more of a fun session. Some technical information, we're going to share about, and kind of really have a conversation with all of you out in the world shooting Lumix or whatever camera brand you've got, and ideally, we're going to be covering, and Europe, there we go. We're going to be covering kind of a bunch of different topics here today. We're going to touch on the new Lumix tethering software for live streaming that was released earlier this week. I'll give you a quick demonstration to walk through. I know our friends over in Europe, I think Ross in the comments here did an awesome video showing you how to set this thing up for Facebook. We're going to do another one just to kind of amplify and show people how this system works. We're going to be covering virtual backgrounds for meetings and applications where you don't have necessarily an ability to maybe do shallow depth of field like I've got here for this bedroom, and how to apply them in applications like Zoom or Teams where they have inbuilt capabilities to just apply those backgrounds to it. And with the backgrounds, we're also going to cover some tips on what makes a good background. How do you determine what kind of content do you want to put behind you outside of using what these apps kind of natively throw in there, which to be honest, usually they're a bit rough, being out in the middle of space or sitting on a beach. It's definitely cool, but why not use this application if these are what you're using for streaming to kind of do a little bit of self-promotion. Instead of having a bookshelf behind you or a bedroom behind you, why not show off some of your photography? It's a pretty cool and easy, straightforward way. So we'll be jumping over to my laptop over here to demonstrate some of that. We'll also be using my laptop to demonstrate how to connect the Lumix Tether software. And we'll also be going over the differences between the photo styles in the Lumix cameras and the filter effects. It ties in pretty well with creating some of these virtual backgrounds. And in general, we get a lot of questions about when do you use one over the other and what makes one better than the other for certain circumstances. So to start with this, let's actually jump over to my laptop and let's get the Lumix Tether conversation going here. So as a reminder, if you guys have questions, we will be answering them throughout the stream. We have a team that monitors chat in here for different regions for Panasonic globally, but then also we have our team here in the United States that's answering questions for US-based questions, things like that. And I will be stopping periodically throughout to read through the questions and kind of answer them live on the stream. So if you have them, drop them in the chat on the Lumix stream here on YouTube. Make sure to tag @Lumix Cameras. This way I get a nice big pop-up on my screen here so that I can see that you're asking us a direct question. Otherwise, know that if this is your first time, there's a ton of helpful people that usually are in the chat here with us that can usually also help out and give you some ideas on answers for questions that you guys may have. So with this, let's jump over to my laptop here. So right here, I've got my just a simple laptop that I use for gaming and playing around with, portable photo editing. And you'll see I have a Zoom meeting open down here so that we can get in and show you that demonstration as well. But to start with, the Lumix Tether software, right? So this is a beta version, and I can't stress that enough, that this is a beta version of software that's released, leveraging the Lumix Tether platform that we've already released a while ago that has compatibility for the GH5, the GH5S, G9, and the full S series of cameras. So what you're going to do is you're going to go on and download that software, which if you check out Ross's video over on the Lumix Academy, they have the links and everything that you'll need to find that. And once the stream's over, we'll plug that into the description down below. Question from Arthur, what's the price of Lumix Tether? Lumix Tether is a free program that comes with compatible cameras for the Lumix line. So if you have a GH5, GH5S, G9, S1, S1R, or S1H, you have compatibility in that software. It is hardware driven on the Lumix cameras as to what's compatible for it. All you need is your serial number on the bottom of the camera to download the software for free. So let's open the software up. So once you download it, you'll have the app here that says Lumix Tether for streaming. Now there are two versions. There's Lumix Tether and Lumix Tether for streaming. Streaming is the beta version that we're going to use for this demonstration. So what we'll do here is you'll get the prompt here that says connect Lumix to PC. And it's as simple as, in my case, just turn my camera on, and I'm using an S1R off on the side, just connected here. And I'm connected with a USB-C cable, USB-C type A on the connection into the camera, or onto the computer, sorry. So what you'll get here is you'll have the normal control panel that opens up for Lumix Tether, like just normally. But what you'll do is you'll click on Live View, and this is going to open up the actual Tether Live View display. So you can see me now in this display. What used to happen with this software is if you wanted to use something like OBS or any other capture software to pull a screen, you'd be limited because you'll always have this UI overlay on the software. What the beta version has added is the ability to just click this toggle, remove all of the overlay so that you're able to just do a screen capture of this and have that send into something like OBS. Now, again, I can't stress enough that this is beta software, so as development continues, it will improve. The biggest thing with this is to just get something out so that you have some access to it, knowing that capture cards and things like the A10 Mini that we use here for the stream are still very hard to come by. It's still not easy to just be able to go out and grab one. So once you have the camera connected, there's a couple things you want to look at with this. I'll go back into the main setting here so you can see all the settings. You'll have live view quality here. This is where you can change where out of the box the standard video resolution is a little bit lower. It's a little bit faster to send the information through over USB. And that comes out at 1120 by 840 resolution. You can now come in and change this to fine, which will up the display resolution to 1600 by 1200, which, if I remember correctly, that is one of the highest resolution video displays over USB that's available. So as this software comes out of beta, everything will be more smooth and more directed. So once you have that set and you know that you're at that highest resolution that you want to send this content through, that's where you can come in and toggle this to be the full view of it. Now, when you connect your camera to it, make sure that you're in creative movie mode. So that's the camcorder icon with the M. That will put the camera into 16:9 aspect ratio. It will enable the camera to focus continuously while you're doing over USB. So it puts it into the standby state where you can have continuous focus. But you want to make sure that you go into the menu and turn that to mode 2 on the cameras where it's applicable. And again, check out Ross's video. It has a really good demonstration and walkthrough of how to actually set that up in the camera, where to find it. So once you have this screen set up, what I recommend, if you don't have dual monitors for this kind of application, so if you're working on a laptop like this, which this is a medium spec laptop, it's a number of years old, maximize this screen so that you're full screen on this. Once you're set up as full screen, that's when you're going to open up OBS. So I'll open up OBS Studio here. And this program is what you're going to use to send to things like YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, any platform that accepts an encoder to send that footage out, or a streaming software to send it out to that destination. What you'll do here next is click on the plus under sources. And I'm making a brief version of this. Our first live stream that we did for Lumix Live, I went specifically through setting up OBS and some of the software for streaming applications. So at the end of this video, we'll put a card in that will link you back to that first video. So definitely check that one out. It will give you all the information about recommending what kind of cameras to use with capture cards, what software is out there, and actually walk you through how to set this up. But for this case, we're going to come here and click Window Capture, and I'm going to create a new window capture. Now, a cool thing with OBS is that if you name it the source the same as what the Windows is going to find this as in the OS, it should automatically pull up that window for you. So I'm going to type in Lumix Tether, and then I'm going to hit OK. Now, this pulled up Zoom, so it didn't really work the way I have had it work numerous times before. So what I'll do here is I'll click Live View, and you'll see that it automatically recognizes that display and brings it up. So what I'll do here is click OK, and then you'll see that it's not sized properly. You get some of the bars that show you that you're out of the range for this stream. And what we'll do here is I will right-click on that video stream, go to Transform, and then I'll want to do Fit to Screen. So this gives me a baseline to start with. But obviously I don't want to have those gray bars on the side or the black bars on the top. So what I'll do here is hold Shift and bring this up. While holding Shift, go to the other box over here, bring this out to remove those gray bars. And now my frame is set to cover the entire frame. So when I click Transition, now I'm set up, I'm ready to go, and I can send this off to whatever software I want to use for tethering. Now, with OBS, you can go into Settings and bring up some of the other settings here to go into Output, Streaming. And this is where you can go in and say, do you want to send it to Twitch, YouTube, or YouTube Gaming, Facebook Live, Twitter, and Periscope. It has a fairly robust set of outputs that you can send this to. Now, something to note is that looking at a lot of the comments online, I've seen that there's a lot of confusion as to what the maximum output resolution is. In our demonstrations for launching this, we used Facebook as the platform that most people we think are going to be using this. Facebook's limitation is 720p if you're not listed as one of their creators or haven't hit certain benchmarks for them. So that's something to just be aware of, that depending on the platform you're sending it to will depend on what resolution you can send out to. And in most cases, since the video output over USB here is only 1200 wide, you want to pretty much mainly stick at about 1080p for streaming out to most services. Adding into the fact that most home wireless connectivity or network connectivity is usually not fast enough to reliably do anything over 1080p, and even in some regions 1080p is going to be tough. 720 is a pretty solid baseline to be able to stream out at, and it's going to be infinitely better than what your built-in camera can do. So what we'll do here now is, once that's all set up, you're basically set ready to go and send this out to the output source that you want to do for streaming, and you're good to go. Now, something to note about the Lumix Tether software, and from what I can tell, pretty much any of the USB tethered softwares right now that are out for different cameras, is that your audio is not sent over USB. With this. So you will need to make sure that you're having some sort of microphone or audio capture capability on your device that you're streaming from. So something as simple as a USB powered microphone is going to be one of your best friends for this. With OBS, you just go in and add an audio source for that, and then you can monitor it through OBS as well. Again, that's just seems to be a common limitation for any of the USB capture softwares. But what sets ours apart a bit as we're moving in and out or through beta into final release is that even when you're connected like this, you still have all the control here for exposure, for frame rate, ISO, white balance, things like that, without losing any capabilities. So you don't have to set the camera up once and hope that your exposure is right and then just go shoot. It lets you go in and tweak it while you're shooting. So I can come in here and I can really drop my ISO down, I can really crank it up, and go in and change all those settings for it. So it gives me all that full control, and I don't have to lose any of that just because I'm over USB. So as far as Lumix Tether goes, like we said again, I want to stress enough that this is beta firmware. This is a first release. Beta is kind of the core of the whole point with that, is that as development continues, it will get better and better and more refined. But it's something that we can just get out and we're able to adapt the existing Lumix tether with. A couple of the questions I've seen coming through here from Michael. The USB port is also used for charging the battery, allowing extended use of the camera. Will the battery be charged during streaming? Depends on the camera you have. The Lumix G9 allows power sustaining over the USB while you're shooting, so you won't actually charge the battery, but you'll sustain. So you do have to have a battery plugged into the camera. And depending on the computer you're using, if the USB ports can actually send power supply out, like if the port's designed for charging, it can be sufficient enough. Some laptops don't have that capability, so you may run into challenges where the port itself doesn't send enough power and might not actually charge the camera. If you're using one of the S cameras, that is USB-C to C connection to your laptop, it means that you are capable to actually charge the camera again, as long as the laptop that you're using has enough power to output over USB. Charging becomes a big part of what hardware computer you're using. So hopefully that answers your computer here, or your question, not your computer. All right, cool. Let's see. Do we have any other questions here? I know there's a lot of people asking about Mac support for it. I would just say stay patient. We don't have any information as far as when and if Mac support's coming for it. Lumix Tether as an app is supported on Mac OS. So hopefully it comes eventually. But again, remember, it's beta software, so development is ongoing with it. Let's see, do we have any other questions here? See a lot of highs and welcomes from across the world. This is really cool to see. We've got so many people coming in from across the world. All right, cool. Well, all right, let's jump into the background conversation then. Again, remember, if you have questions and you want them answered, tag us at Lumix Cameras in the chat, and someone from Panasonic, which as you can see, we have global representation here for Panasonic this week. Someone will be able to answer your question. I will periodically be going in and answering some questions, even if they've been answered on chat as well. This way others who may not be seeing it can still get an answer for that. But let's jump back to the computer here, and let's talk about some of those virtual backgrounds. Actually, let's do it this way. Virtual backgrounds for tethering and meetings is something that, obviously I think a lot of people don't necessarily take a look at. Actually, I will address one question here from Alvin. Most videographers use OS X. Why is the development being done on Windows? Fact is, Windows is still one of the widest distributed platforms for computer software across the board. Mac OS does also tend to be a little bit more difficult for developing and clearing through Apple's processes for actually getting an app on the App Store. And it's just the way it kind of happened. We understand that a lot of people, a lot of professionals use Mac OS for your workhorse computers. Windows just was the one that was chosen because my understanding is that it's a bit easier to code for and get the actual beta app out. So, question from Kevin: what is the light above your monitor? I'm using two of the Elgato key lights, so I have one on each side here to kind of flood with even lighting. So, yeah. All right, cool. So back to what we were talking about with the virtual backgrounds, right? So the inbuilt virtual backgrounds that you'll see in apps like Zoom or Teams, and I use those two as the primary examples because they have built-in keying capabilities and probably, in my opinion, the most straightforward, simple thing to use if you don't want to, mess around with keying and a green screen or have a device like that. Most of the backgrounds that they include in it are those backgrounds that you look at and it's like, oh, okay, I want to be in space, or I want to be sitting in a field where, a blade of grass is bigger than my head. And Do they get the job done? Yes. If you're sitting in a situation where you don't want to have, a bookshelf behind you, or if you're in a situation like where I am in my apartment where I don't really have a separate office that I can have a streaming setup in, so I'm in my bedroom. If you don't have access to fast glass where you can do shallow depth of field to kind of blur the background out, you may not want to always have to sit in a meeting or go on a live stream where that's your backdrop. You may want to change it. And what's cool is some of these programs offer the ability, like I said, to not have to go out and necessarily go purchase a green screen and lighting and all of this extra stuff to just change the background out. Now, is it the most professional way to do it? By far, no, it is not the most professional way to do it. Those that are more in tune with what a good key looks like will very quickly notice the masking issues that come in some of the software, but it becomes a really simple way to just hide the background and add some difference to your stream versus what others in, say, a company may be doing on a big group chat. And when you start looking at it, it's like, oh, okay, well, why not use your own photography? Even if you're a videographer and you've never really used your camera as a photography tool, that's the beauty of having mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras and, the Lumix line. They're equally as competent stills cameras as they are video cameras, so why not use the tool you have? So with this whole setup, there's a couple things that you want to be aware of when you're going to be either selecting a photo from your catalog to put as a background image, or if you're actually just going to go out and create content for this. Now more than ever, I think it's a good exercise to just take your camera and go out and create imagery with it. It can be a big help if you're someone like me who used to be traveling every single week to different places in the United States to meet with all of you in person. Now I'm stuck at home and, my living room and my porch, they're great, but, they start to get kind of old. So taking your camera, going out on a photo walk, and just creating imagery for a purpose can be a good, break from the monotony of day-to-day work. So things you want to look at, right? So if I go in here and we're going to look at my desktop here in Lightroom, as you start going through old software, not old software, old images that you may have, you may look at it and say, hey, this may look like a great image for capture to put behind me. And these images here, these are from a cross-country trip I took back in 2012, 2013. And, as I start to look through them, I'm like, yeah, some of these may actually look kind of cool. I want to sit outside in Yellowstone and have Yellowstone as my background. Or a beautiful sunrise over, the river going through Yellowstone as well. As you start looking at them as photographs, they can work great. You follow rule of thirds, you make sure you're paying attention to the composition so that it, draws your eye through a frame. You follow the basics that we've typically always worked with from a what is judged as a good photograph. But when you start looking at how to apply these things for something like streaming, those kinds of rules don't necessarily apply, and they don't necessarily apply in the best way either. So starting to look at some of these images, obviously vertical images that you take, these aren't going to be the best solutions that you can look at for streaming online. This looks like I just dropped most of my internet. Okay, we should be back now. So as you start looking at some of the images that you want to capture, you may look at it and say, this image looks great. It's a vertical image. It's not going to look great when you start doing some streaming on the camera because it's just going to be, it's going to crop. You're going to have to cut in so far into this, and it's just not going to be one of the best looking images. As you start going through and let's see here. This is one image that I took that's one of, back when super over processing was one of those, kind of big things that was happening. Everyone wanted to do ultra HDR images and all that kind of stuff. And as an image at the time, subjective, does it look cool? Okay. That's up to some tastes. But an image like this would look horrid as a background for live streaming. It's got way too much detail. It's too busy. There's too much going on. So what do you do to kind of get around that, right? So start looking at images from past catalogs that you may have that are a little more neutral, that are maybe not as busy, that are more, in line where you know that the center of the frame is where you're going to be positioned in the image. Am I going to block anything in this frame? Am I going to have a tree sticking out of the top of my head in this frame? Or is it, kind of compositionally, is it good for putting something in front of it? So once you start, kind of looking at those things and figuring out which images you want to have, if you're looking at past images that you may have, that's where you want to start looking at how to actually apply them to software, how to actually start using them. When you start looking in here, one of the first things you want to notice is that a lot of times cameras will either shoot in a 3:2 or 4:3 aspect ratio, depending on the camera that you use. And when you take an image like that, obviously it's fine, but video display is 16:9. So the first thing you're going to want to do is actually go in and start cropping some of these images. So just as simple as going in, dropping into a 16:9 crop, you'll see that right now that image would be ready to go to send over, and I can use it without having to worry about, is it going to be slid up? Is it slid down? How's it actually going to look behind the frame? The other key thing to remember here is that you don't have to have ultra high resolution images for live streaming in these keyed backdrops. Depending on the camera that you're using, will determine some of which one you would want to look at as far as resolution goes. But if you're using just a basic webcam that your laptop has, you really don't want to go too over high resolution with it, because I'll show you what it looks like in a second. So say, we'll look at this image. It's not really distracting. It's a mountain covered pass, coming into, I think this is coming into Colorado. So this image would work well, but what if you want to go out and actually create an image for this? Well, there's a couple things that you want to look at. So images capturing 4 backgrounds, you want to, like we said, watch out for distractions, watch out for things that are going to stick in and out of your head because of the composition, where normally, you'd think rule of thirds, so keeping someone off to the side versus keeping dead center in here. It's a different way of thinking compared to how we think as photographers. So know that you want to keep the center part of your image basically clear of content, or clear of a focus for your eye, unless you're doing something where it's kind of very abstract. So a shot like this, where it's abstract because you have leading lines that are bringing you into the center of the image, can work well as a backdrop for your streaming purposes. An image like this of the Oculus in New York can work well. It's a bit distracting because of all the extra stuff going on around here. You have obviously people in the frame, things like that. It can work well because the center of the image, everything kind of culminates in towards the center of the frame, which again, like we said, that's where most likely your face is going to be in the stream. Like what we're doing here, I'm in the center of the frame. But then you look at images like this. This is outside of Oculus in New York. It as an image, subjectively cool, but as a background, this wouldn't be a great background at all. It's too busy. There's too many different leading lines running everywhere, and it becomes a bit of a distraction. And one of the things is, when you start looking at the software, it may not even key that well. So you may end up running into where it just doesn't look great at all. So when you start looking at other kinds of images and you go out and create images, you can do stuff like this. This is Paramount Theater here in Austin, Texas, downtown, one morning, or a couple mornings ago. And as an image, cool. It shows you Paramount Theater. It's early in the morning. And this was shot with the new 20-60 on my S1R. As an image, it's fine. But as a backdrop, it's a little too busy again. So something that I usually suggest for a lot of people is just defocus the image. Just put it in manual focus and crank the focus all the way back or all the way forward so that you're blurring out an image. Either side of the spectrum is going to look good. If you're shooting a landscape, you want to close focus. If you're shooting something close up, you want to far focus so that you're maximizing the bokeh there. An image like this is one of the museums downtown. Same thing. As an image, standalone, cool. It's just a picture of the building. But when you defocus it, you get those bokeh balls that a lot of people want to have for the backgrounds of your stream. And you want to have, just in general, a less distracting background, but that also gives you some vibrancy and pop in an image. But ultimately, one of the best things you can do for a virtual background for any system is set the camera up in the spot or height-wise where it's going to be for your stream. So one of the traps that a lot of times people fall in is, you'll put the camera down low, you'll put the camera up high, you'll be at some obscure angle to film a building or a landscape, something like that. And when you overlay yourself over that image, it ends up looking awkward because our brains and eyes are really good at picking up things that are just not right. That when you look at the image, something is just not aligned properly with it. So what you can do is set your tripod up, get the camera positioned in a way where if I'm sitting down, like in the chair here in my for this stream, the camera that I'm going to normally use for the streaming here is a little above eyesight, right in front of me here. So I'll have the camera there, whether it's on a tripod or wherever, and I'll take the image from that sight line. So try to keep the sight line that a viewer is going to be looking at you at for this background. And take your photograph. Blurring an image, so by shifting focus either super near, super far, adds a little bit just more pleasing look for that kind of background. So if I take a look here, this is, again, as a photograph, it ain't great. But this is just literally the exact spot that I'm in, shot with the camera that I use for this stream, which is the S1H and the 50S Pro. Just focused all the way as close as it goes and just blurring out that background that I have behind me. So now I can put this background behind any of the stream or tools that I want to use for delivering this content. So if we jump over here and I go back into my laptop here, we'll see I have Microsoft Zoom, or not Microsoft Zoom, Zoom meetings open here. Now I'm using just the basic crappy webcam that this laptop has, which obviously is not that great of a webcam. Most computer webcams are pretty bad. But applying these kind of backgrounds is super simple. You just go into where your video settings are in this app in particular and choose virtual background. Now, like we said, you've got a bunch of different options here as you start looking. By default, you have things like there's the Golden Gate Bridge. There's those blades of grass, like I said, that are bigger than my head. I can be out in space, kind of out there. Zoom's kind of cool because it does also let you put looping video in the background as well. So if I want to be in front of the Aurora Borealis, if I want to be sitting on a beach with the wind blowing, but they're all super kind of, just blah backgrounds. They're what everybody sees and everybody shows. So if we remember, the background that I have right now is literally that's my stream computer and that's my closet and just a empty wall. It doesn't look great. I want it to look better than that. So if we look at some of those images that we just looked at before, and I go in and I say, okay, well, here's that bokeh version of the Paramount Theater. Again, it looks okay. If I take my headphones off, the keying does a little bit better, but you'll see, look at those issues that keying software has. Where now if I go in and I go say, okay, here's that Oculus shot. So as you can see, if you look at it, there's that disconnect in the perspective that you're looking at here. You see okay, the background, it's an image, it looks okay, but the size of my representation against this background, because it was shot from a very low angle, it looks awkward as a background. In the small preview, they look okay. But then if I go in and I look at, say, that other image that we were talking about, standing outside of Oculus, it looks, marginally acceptable because it's roughly from the height that this laptop is for my presentation that I'm sitting here talking to you all on. And it can work, but it's super distracting. Like, people aren't going to be looking at you while you're here. They're going to be looking at the image because there's so much going on with it. That's why you start to look and say, well, start using defocused backgrounds. It's still a big change from what that regular background is, but it's not super distracting where your eyes are being drawn away from the person that's talking in front of you. Versus if I go to look at the one that isn't done like that, it looks like I'm a newscaster in a very low budget presentation here. Content like that first one that I showed here, where it's got leading lines, it's relatively kind of abstract. These will fit better for streaming like this because it changes that background. It's something of yours. It lets you go in and be less distracting, and it just fits into that frame. And then if we look at that last one that I did here, now that was shot on a 50mm lens where the laptop is a much wider angle lens. So if I move in closer here, you'll see that it looks closer. It's a bit better of a solution for this kind of backdrop situation. And again, as you can see, the webcam that this laptop has is pretty rough. It's pretty bad. So with creating all of these different kind of backdrops and these different ideas with it, there's so much that you can do, whether you're just playing around with the camera or looking at previous images that you've had that you want to start using as these backdrops. You just want to look at it and play around with it, have some fun with these different kinds of options that you have at your disposal. One of the things that we can do with the Lumix cameras is be able to use some of the features that the camera has to actually enhance this kind of content, right? So by changing the color profiles, by changing what kind of filter effects you're using, they all add different things to this type of shooting. And even for those that actually just want to go out and create and play around with your camera, there's a lot in these tools to be able to just create cool looking images that work and are simple to do. So I just changed over here to my S1 that I have mounted here, and I'm looking at a color checker because we're going to be showing some cool effects on the filters and what the photo styles do by comparison to filter effects, that other part of the conversation we were talking about earlier. As a reminder, if you have questions about any topic, drop them in the comments below, tag @Lumix Cameras, and I'll answer them on stream if I see it. Our team is in there answering questions for y'all as well, and just have fun. Have conversations with your fellow photographers and videographers that are here with us. So looking back here on the camera, there's a couple things that you have at your disposal for content creation, for making photographs. First of those is photo styles. Now, we covered this a bit in one of our earlier live streams, but photo styles versus filters brings up some confusion when you start looking at, well, which one should I use in which application, which one's better over the other, and why? Why do we have two different versions of this? So we're going to start with photo styles. So if you're looking to get color profiles in your camera that are straightforward color profiles that can apply to the JPEGs out of the camera, but then are tagged in those raw files so something like Lightroom can apply them in post, that's where your photo style choices come in. Now, photo styles, if you've played around in the camera, you'll know you have standard, vivid, natural, flat. These are in some cameras, not at all of them. Landscape or scenery, portrait. We have 3 different kinds of monochrome in here. And then you have things like Cine like D, Cine like V, like 709 for the video users, and Vlog for the video users as well. The S-series cameras, you guys may notice that you also have My Photo Styles, which are where you can program in custom photo styles as well. But these are specifically tuned to get a very specific look out of the camera that isn't something that's, over the top effect driven. So think of these as more kind of standard baselines for your image creation. So when you look at what options you have available to you, you have things like changing the contrast, changing the highlight and shadow, which is adjusting your S-curve, which is contrast for specifically highlights, contrast specifically for shadows. You have saturation control, hue control, sharpness, and noise reduction. So all of these things are customizable for each one of these picture profiles. So if you're shooting and standard for you tends to be maybe too dull, you want something that's more bright, more vibrant, more popping, that's where you can go in and say, take a look at Vivid. And like I said here, I'm using a color checker here to show you what those changes are when you look at something that's, say, a calibrated color chart. So we're in standard now, and if I jump over here, now we're in Vivid, you'll see that blue and red pops a bit more. Purple, kind of gets a little bit darker. The contrast raises in the image, and you just get a more vibrant, popping image here. You go to the next one here, which is natural. That gives you a very neutral color palette. So it takes it's a very, as it says, neutral color palette. It tries to not have any kind of swing one way or another towards a shift in color. We also have flat, which is just designed to be a relatively flat overall color profile, and designed so that if you're going to be adding some contrast and saturation back into the image yourself, that's where flat comes in. Landscape being designed to kind of accentuate greens, kind of earth tones, where landscapes tend to just, you want maybe the green grass to pop a little bit more. That's where landscape becomes the better choice for you. Then you have portrait, which focuses more on skin tones. So to make sure that your skin tones say kind of, neutral, and try to not have any, hue one direction or another. So it's great for if you're doing portraiture work. Portrait's a good one to be in. Then we have our 3 different monochrome modes. You have just a simple straight up black and white conversion. You have L monochrome, which is a bit more contrast. Then you have L monochrome D, which if you notice, there's subtle differences between L monochrome and L monochrome D. But I want to pause on the monochrome effect here, because one of the things that a lot of people use as we continue on to, say, the filter effect part of the conversation is that filter effects typically have things like rough monochrome or, kind of more punchy, contrasty black and white filter effects. And they're great, but they're only for JPEGs. You can't shoot RAW with those. With the way we've built the system here, I can come in, just like I said before, I have my contrast, highlight, shadow controls over this picture profile, but I also have extra control here for things like color toning. So black and white photography, we would tone them if you want to add some different effect to it. So you could do selenium toning, brown toning, different looks to get different effects on a black and white image. But we also have in here different filter effects. So if you're someone who shot black and white, back in film, you would know that you add different color filters to the camera to accentuate contrast in different ways. So if we look here, if I turn on, I can do a yellow filter, which you'll see if you look at the blue on the bottom there, blue really gets dark. I can change this into orange, to red, and to green. Now, green being one of the most drastic changes. So if you look at the color checker as to how much those colors are remapped into a grayscale. So this lets you play around and really customize your black and white imagery to your style. So if there was a certain way you liked shooting, years ago when you got into this, or if you're just someone who wants to give your photos something different than what everyone else offers as far as black and white goes, play around with some of these effects. Now, out of the camera, they do just apply to the JPEGs, but when you go into something like Lightroom, you're able to actually reapply some of these settings into your RAW file, so you still have your baseline to work with on the computer. Now, the other cool thing that we've added here is grain effect. So when you start looking around, a lot of imagery on Instagram and Facebook, a lot of times, there's this big push towards, the older style of photography, so film photography. And as someone who grew up and was taught on film, it's fun to go back into, you know, shooting those styles and that kind of look with my modern cameras and not have to go back out and, you know, buy rolls of film, make sure my film camera works, and go out and just kind of play around. What we've added here is a grain effect to the monochrome filter, monochrome picture styles in the camera. So I can do off, low, standard, or high. Now these affect, you know, kind of mimicking some film stocks in black and white from, you know, decades ago. So think low would be something like 200 speed film. Standard would be something like 400 speed film. And high is anywhere between 800 to 1600 speed film. And as you start to look at it, you'll see that you get a much harsher grain structure in the image that just gives it a very different look. So these are fun to play around with if you just want to start messing around with different color and different looks for your image across the board. Continuing out of monochrome, that's where we have things like Cine like D. So if you're someone who is in the filming side of the industry, Cine like D and Cine like V are cinematic color profiles. D stands for desaturated, V stands for vivid. And these are kind of just baseline things to start with, where you can do minor color correction to them or minor tweaking to get them closer to the look that you want to have. And again, as you see with all of our cameras, you see these things change as you go through it. So that's the beauty of modern mirrorless digital cameras here. And every single one of these, you still have all that control over. Now, if you're someone in the photography side, you're probably not going to use this particular picture profile, the Leica 709. Leica 709 is designed for an output to a Rec 709 color space, which is in the video side of the world for broadcast, things like that. So from a photography perspective, there's not really a whole lot of benefit into shooting like this unless you know that that image that you're capturing is directly going to be given to a broadcast studio and there's going to be nothing done to it to remap it or put it into a video timeline, which is such a small use case for it that from a photography perspective, just shoot raw, just shoot in one of the other profiles where the image will look nice, and then you can go into your software and add it into a video timeline and bring it into the color profile of the rest of the video files. And then you'll see Vlog. Vlog being the logarithmic profile on the S cameras and the GH cameras and the G9 now, that is designed to maximize dynamic range at given ISOs for video production. So this is the closest you're going to get to the camera being able to be flexible to match to other cameras, match to a workflow that you're having, and really customize the colors the way you want them for specific looks. The video side of the industry, you guys are well aware of Vlog for the most part, and Rec 709. For the photographers out there that may have never looked at a logarithmic profile, there's not a huge benefit for a photographer to shoot in Vlog. Primarily because while Vlog is designed from a video perspective to maximize dynamic range, which in the S series is 14 plus stops, stills photographers have much more dynamic range to work with because you have the ability to shoot raw stills. So if you're out there photographing and you're doing it for the purpose of mixing it in with a video file, just shoot raw. Raw will give you much more flexibility to match colors into your production than Vlog will from a stills perspective. And in a lot of cases, when you load a raw file that's been tagged as Vlog into Lightroom, Vlog isn't a choosable color profile for that. Lightroom does have the ability to let it sit and go as what the camera shot as for raw processing, so you can kind of get it. But you end up having to add all this extra contrast back into the image that you really didn't have to do to begin with. So it's kind of an extra step that you don't really need. And then when you look at the S-Series cameras in particular, you'll also have 4 My Photo styles. Now these can be programmed in camera. As you look here, I can go in and say I want my photo style 4 here to be portrait, and then make a bunch of my tweaks to it. This way I can go in and save that image out and I'm set. This means that in the menu you can turn off all the other picture styles and just really work with your specific picture style or photo styles that are applicable to your situation. Now, let me reset this back to standard. So now that brings up the question is, well then what are filters? If photo styles give you all of this control and give you all of this detail over the colors that the camera produces, what are filters? So if you go into the menu here and I scroll down to filter settings, you'll see that I can turn filter effects on, or I can go to set. So I'm going to go to set here for this conversation. So what's cool here is that the filter effects are designed very much like what currently is being used on things like Instagram for filters, or Snapchat, or things like that. Social media platforms where you're adding all of these different effects to an image to make them look cool or not. The Lumix cameras have had these built in for basically since day one on the original G1, the original mirrorless camera. They give you a ton of different kind of effect controls over the image, and I think that's the big difference here is you're looking at effect controls versus color controls on a camera. So this is where you have things like expressive, retro, old days, high key, low key, sepia toning. These are those monochrome effects here. You have different kind of super ultra high, vivid looking images with high contrast. You have a high dynamic range color profile, cross processing, toy effect, toy pop, bleach bypass, even a miniature effect, which if you're a photographer and you've shot with tilt shift lenses, this mimics the effect of a tilt shift lens where you want to make things look super tiny from an upward angle or shooting down from an upward position. You even have things like soft focus, which gives just that kind of general soft ethereal look to an image. Fantasy, which just gives you that kind of, desaturated kind of silk look to it. Star filters, which if you came again from when you use filters, you could add a star filter on a camera. So every pinpoint of light goes into these kind of pinpoints of stars. This is where you can get to one-touch color. And then also go into sunshine. So we'll play around with some of these things here, and I have some examples that one of our team members shot while we were getting ready for this. So if I look here, I have the sunshine filter on here. Now, again, to show you the vast difference here, filter effects are exactly that. They are filters on top of the overall image. So I can go in here, tap on the touch bar, and click on the little sun icon here, and I can move this affected, kind of lens flare or starburst anywhere in the frame and have it digitally add in, a sun flare. So it can be cool if you're shooting in a situation where you just don't have good sun. You can add a bit of a flare into it. What's also cool is I can tap on the colors here and I can change the general color hue that this is giving off onto the image. Super white light, blue light, red light, or kind of a yellowish kind of warming light. So it's kind of cool to play around with. If I go back in and tap on sunshine, this is where I can go up and even go into things like one-touch color. So I can go in with the eyedropper that this camera provides, and I can pick a color on this camera that I want to highlight for my black and white images. So right now I've selected over that blue image here. So you'll see now that it's a black and white image, but only blue is coming through on this. So it's black and white, but only, one spot of color. I can scroll down to go to red, and now only red is showing. And if you look at the sunglasses, you'll see the big difference there, where it goes and now all of a sudden the sunglasses are blacked out, that blue kind of mirror look on those glasses is gone, and just those shades of red are here. So it gives you some cool things to play around with if you're just looking for something to play around with on the camera. Then I can even go in and the star effect one, which is, like we said, it gives you those effects of starbursts on any kind of pinpoint of light. So they become a whole bunch of just added filter effects that only apply to the JPEGs. These effects that you shoot will not apply to RAW files at all. So there's no way to actually add these in on the computer side of it. What you do have an option to do is when you're in filter settings, you do also have the option to record without filter settings. Because I'm attached via Wi-Fi or via HDMI cable, some of the settings are disabled because I'm in a display mode here. So it makes it a little challenging to demo some of those things. But as I scroll up, you'll see, you know, each of these different kind of effects will give you just different looks. If you're someone who is shooting specifically for something like Instagram or Facebook, filter effects can be a fun thing to play with. If you're a bit more you know, advanced in shooting and you want to have more specific control over an image and apply these kind of effects in something like Photoshop, then that's where you're going to shoot in RAW plus JPEG or just RAW and just use your photo styles to get your base colors right and then add effects in afterwards. So that's kind of a basic coverage of, you know, talking about filter effects and photo styles in the camera. Like I said, we have a couple examples here of what one of our team members was shooting, you know, while we were prepping for this and just playing around with it. And these are kind of good things to play around with, good effects to play around with when you want to, you know, kind of shoot for those backgrounds. Shoot so that you've got something that becomes a nice looking virtual background for your camera, or even just something to play around with. So like we showed before, it's keeping to things that are relatively simple, things that are roughly in the you know, line of sight for where your camera's going to be positioned in with you. So like this image here, which is using the sunburst effect, where as long as it's planned out properly, it can look relatively natural. You know, photographing just straight up against a flat wall so that it's an even surface against the background, because that's what's going to be behind you anyway. Playing around with that one-touch monochrome look here. So where it's pulling the red from the flowers, but then the green is being masked out in black and white so that the color is what pops through first. Again, red here. Again, you know, red roses are, those aren't roses, are they? I'm horrible with flowers. I apologize for anyone that knows a lot more about flowers than I do. But these red flowers against the green leaves behind it, having that isolation out of it. Again, the blue flowers against that background. And then something like this where you start playing around with some of the color profiles where you're looking at a bit of, you know, kind of an old days-ish kind of look, where it's a little bit of a brown toning to the image so it mutes everything. It's a little bit softer of an image when you look at it, but it's also framed so that it would match well as a background for you. So I hope that, you know, these effects were oh, help if I go into OBS to actually be able to transfer back over to myself here. So I hope that, you know, a lot of this stuff, you know, was useful for everybody. You know, we just like I said at the beginning of this was more of a fun, you know, some informational, some technical, but then also just some fun things that you can do with your cameras while we're still working to get back into some sort of normalcy with it. I'd love to jump in and take some questions. I know we've had the team working overtime here across the globe answering your guys' questions, so that's definitely really cool. To reiterate some of the answers that they gave, for those that were wondering if you can catch this stream after it's over, these are all housed on the Lumix Cameras YouTube channel, so give it a day or so. Once it processes after it's uploaded, you'll be able to go in and rewatch all of these things for you. The other question is from James, are there any infrared filters? There isn't infrared filters in the camera. That is, as was responded here, modern digital cameras for the most part have an infrared filter, so they filter out infrared light. But if you're shooting in monochrome, one of the L monochrome D or really any of the monochrome photo styles, and add the red filter onto it, boost the highlight curve, you can mimic some of black and white infrared. It's not 100% the same, and if you've shot real black and white photography, whether it's film or with a converted camera, you will definitely see the differences there. But it's something you can do to kind of mimic it. You can also just grab an ultra dark opaque filter for infrared photography and have really, really long exposures. So those will capture images in red, so the red color spectrum, and then do some conversion on the computer to bring it back out. Those can mimic it again, but cameras have a fairly strong infrared filter on there. Let's see, do we have any other questions? And this is the kind of the thing, you know, these streams, these are open to, you know, any questions you guys have across the board. We will always do our best to answer what we can. I know a lot of times there's questions about things that, you know, no one on a stream would be able to answer. So we appreciate you putting some of those questions in, but unfortunately a lot of that stuff we just don't have answers for. Let's see here. What other kind of questions we got? Let's see, comment from Arthur, off topic. Any suggestions on showing a pre-recorded movie during a Zoom call? It seems by default to always be jumpy. Yeah, Arthur, so showing anything that's pre-recorded, as those of you that were on last week's stream saw, does introduce some challenges. You typically want to have some sort of tool that can act as an intermediary between your system and the streaming software you're using, whether it's Zoom or something like that. A lot of times the lag and the jump that you're seeing are either down to two things that I have found. Either the computer that you're using just is not powerful enough to play the video, encode it, send it into the software, and stream it all at the same time, which would cause lagging and jumping and some issues there. Or two, you're having some resolution issues where the video resolution that you're pumping into it is much, much higher than what the streaming software is able to control. So when it gets into the pipeline for that software to encode it and send it out to the viewers, it's just too much information for it. Most meeting software like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, they're designed to be very fast in encoding and delivery so that you're having a as close to real-time conversation as you can. And replaying real-time video is one of the hardest things to do with it. As an example, when we do our streams, I'm working on a desktop computer here that's it's running dual graphics cards, it's running one of the latest gen Ryzen processors here, and even that, when we do some streaming, you can run into some hiccups with it, as you know, if you don't have resolutions matched properly. Let's see. Hopefully that gave you some direction to look at there. Question from James, question from James. Are there certain colors that lend themselves for better keying experiences? Yes, 100% there are. Any photo retailer that you look at will have options for green or blue screen. Green screen being one of the most common used for keying. You can easily get those. Usually they're some sort of like a fabric background, or you can get them in paper backdrops. You hang those behind you, use something like the keying software, which actually if I jump over here back to my desktop, I can show you. Like I'm using the ATEM for our streaming here. When I look at this, I can go into Chroma and then select that green screen back there and then add in screening to that image. It lets you just drop in the image you want in the media player here under one, and then key yourself into it. The thing that you want to make sure you look out for if you're doing keying with is lights. Light are your best friend for keying. You want to make sure that that background has even lighting across the board so that the keying software can pull that color out without any issue, and then process it for you there. Yeah, That's green is going to be your best bet. You can use blue, but a lot of times you'll have maybe something that is also blue. Usually you don't have anything that's got that lime green, key green in there for it. Let's see, what other questions we got? Figure we'll give it another couple of minutes here if anyone's got some questions. Otherwise, I think we'll call it a day here. Let's see here, from Clint. Is there a way for the GH5 to consume less battery power recording at 1080? It seems to be eating more battery compared to previous GH4, GH3 models recording at 1080. The GH5 does record, is consuming more power across the board than a GH4 or a GH3. Because you're working with a faster processor, you're working with a much higher resolution sensor, and you have in-body stabilization and higher video codecs, it just in general will draw more power than a GH4 or a GH3. For your solution, if you're doing long-term recording or long-term streaming like we do here, I would highly suggest investing in one of the battery deletes for that camera. I think it's DMW DCC 8, DCC 9. If you look up the battery delete for a GH5, GH4, or GH3, that will replace the battery and let you plug into mains power. So you never have to worry about battery power again for your streaming or for long-term content creation. It'll save you a lot of headache and you don't have to worry about the batteries at that point. Let's see here. Photo 1, will there be a demo on the new software that allows Lumix cameras to be used for Zoom or Microsoft Teams meetings? So at the beginning of this session, we did about how to plug into OBS. At the current time, the way Zoom and Teams work, they don't plug in since the camera's not being piped in as a webcam for that. So you would have to you'd have to create a virtual webcam using the software with it. There are tutorials out there on how to be able to utilize the screen capture from Lumix Tether to do that, but that's part of the whole setup right now. That again, Lumix Tether software is in beta. So it's set up right now for just screen capture instead of acting as an actual USB video device. DCC 12, thank you, Panasonic Europe. That's the adapter for the GH5. Now, remember, you will need an AC adapter as well as the DCC part number that lets you actually plug it in. So cool. Let's see. At this point, I think we've got through pretty much all the questions. I know, like I said, the team's been great in there, answering questions that you guys all might have. So with that, I think we will call it for today. I want to thank everyone for spending the time with us to go over some of these topics. Next week's session is going to be a lot of fun. We are bringing next Thursday, same time, so 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're bringing in the support team that I work with here in the United States. So Jack Salamanchik, Michael Richardson, Brandon Cortez, and Mark Toll. We're bringing my team on to kind of give you guys an introduction as to who we are here in the United States. We'll be talking about a lot of stuff, what cameras we love using, what types of photography we love, and just kind of having a more casual conversation with the team. Make sure to tune in for that. If you guys have questions that you want to ask some of the team members here, make sure to bring them. Like I said, next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, tune in for this. If you liked the content you see here, or if you have suggestions for the comment, make sure to interact with us on social media. Leave a comment down below once the video is posted online. We do check them, we do read them, and we do take your suggestions for future streams here. Make sure to drop a like on this video if you did like it. Click that bell icon so that you can get notifications for when the stream goes live next week. And make sure to subscribe to us so that you don't miss any of the content that we put out between these live streams and product announcements. We did just release the 20 to 60 millimeter, and we have some awesome content on the channels as well. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining with us, and we will see everybody next week.